Welcome back. A spate of attacks in Nigeria's southern region over the last few weeks has driven the OPEC members' oil output to a more than 20-year low, deepening the worst economic crisis in decades and prompting President Muhammadu Buhari to boost the local military presence. The latest in a spate of these attacks in the region is the attack on Chevron's onshore activities, which have been shut down at its Escravos terminal.
A militant group called the Niger Delta Avengers and other militants who say they are fighting for a greater share of oil profits and end to pollution and independence for the region have intensified attacks in recent months, pushing oil output to its lowest in more than 20 years and compounding the problems faced by Africa's largest economy. The federal government hopes moving in troops will protect oil facilities, but for Iradiri, president of the Ijo Youth Council Group, such tactics are fueling anger that widespread poverty was not being addressed, driving young people into militancy.
Obasanjo started the peace process in the Niger Delta. And that process saw certain conditions put before him. He left. President Yar'Adua consolidated on it, achieved an amnesty for agitators at that time, and agreed to fulfill the agreements that were reached on the table. Unfortunately, he died, and President Goodluck Jonathan took over. Goodluck Jonathan continued in that spirit. Certain things were met, certain were not met. But, you know, because you could see that the body language of government was in the spirit of a peaceful environment, people exercised a lot of restraint. But this administration came in, and the body language of the administration did not suggest that they actually wanted a peaceful environment.
Caro Edoro, who attacked pipelines in the creeks for 10 years before joining the amnesty in 2011, said the latest insurgents were foot soldiers who had not benefited from the amnesty because senior militants hijacked the money and benefits.
Yes, most of those leaders, they won't go back to the creek because what they have, nobody wants to die and leave all these big houses and the cars behind. They are living very well, so they will never ever go back to the creek. Most of the boys that are in the creek are the ones that are suffering. The leaders will not go back because they are living very well. They will not go back. They benefited from the struggle.
The first thing to determine is what is it that they want, and then what have we got to offer them, right? It's only after that point that we can begin to determine what the likely outcomes will be. But at this point in time, what we have today is undesirable, unacceptable, and untenable.
British Foreign Minister Philip Hammond earlier said this month that President Muhammadu Buhari needed to deal with the root causes of the conflict, and for many, the earlier that is done, the better for the country.
Now, a recent report on global economic outlook released by the International Monetary Fund suggests that Egypt has replaced South Africa as the second largest economy in Africa. The IMF said that South Africa is now the third largest economy on the African continent after Nigeria and Egypt. According to the report, the gross domestic product of Egypt has been increased by 7.5% during the period from 2012 to 2015. Let's make a sense of this as I'm being joined by the lead analyst for the Middle East and North Africa for West Sands Advisory Limited, London, Jack Kennedy. Good afternoon, Kennedy. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon.
Now, how is it that Egypt has overtaken South Africa as the second largest economy in Africa?
I mean, the question of how, it's more a question of why has it overtaken South Africa. Really, the South African economy itself has been underperforming considerably over the last few years. So I would assume that rather than the productivity of the Egyptian economy being the reason, it's more to do with endemic problems to the South African economy that's been costing it its place as Africa's second largest economy.
So it's basically the South Africa. Now, despite the terror attacks that have hampered Egypt's tourism sector, data shows the country has seen an improvement in its GDP growth rate at 7.5%. That's between 2012 and 2015. Now, isn't that a good indication that the country is really growing?
It's a good indication that the current administration of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is certainly trying to implement growth strategies within the Egyptian economy. I mean, the terrorism attacks on tourism within Egypt will not have a great effect on the wider Egyptian economy. Tourism is an important source of foreign currency in dollars for the Egyptian economy, but it's not a mainstay of economic production. I think that what is important and what has been costing the Egyptian economy considerable amounts of growth over the last 5 years is issues regarding global growth, global trade. It's a considerable proportion of its GDP comes from remittances, foreign remittances from workers outside of Egypt, from tolls that are extracted from the Suez Canal. These are all based on global trade trends, and in order for the economy to really improve, we're going to have to see a much greater increase in global productivity for Egypt. I wouldn't say terrorism is a particular mainstay of the economy.
Now, considering what Egypt is going through now, we've seen a series of attacks on Egypt and their airlines. What are investors thinking?
I mean, security is obviously a real issue for foreign investment in Egypt, and I think that certainly regarding the latest plane crash in Egypt, it's important to note that it's not yet clear whether or not that is the result of a terrorist attack. So what investors are looking to see is the promise of stability, and I think in the medium to long term, the current administration, as long as it can fully implement a greater distribution of wealth equality within Egypt, will not face a genuine challenge to its authority. I think that when we consider where and how terrorism affects the Egyptian state, it's at the moment reasonably peripheral. It's in the Sinai Peninsula, concentrated, which is not a particularly productive area of economic growth. So I think as far as the security concerns for international investment goes, there's a reasonable assumption that the situation will remain at least as stable as it is at the moment.
Right. In general, you cover Egypt in MENA. What is the outlook for that economy?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
What is the outlook for Egypt's economy?
The outlook in general, I think over the next 5 years, it's predicted to be about 4 to 5% growth. That's certainly what the government would like to achieve. The main goal of the current administration is to get inflation under control. There is a thriving black market in American dollars that has to be contained. But I would say that in general, the outlook for the Egyptian economy is fair. Is fair.
All right, thank you. Thank you for speaking to us, Jack. Enjoy your weekend.
Thank you, you too.
Jack Kennedy, lead analyst for the Middle East and North Africa for West Sands Advisory Limited, London. Now, as the cost of food, commodities in Libya continues to rise, families in the capital, Tripoli, are struggling to make ends meet. The country's economy has been severely damaged by political strife and conflict following the uprising against Muammar Gaddafi in 2011.
Libya's economy is largely dependent on oil revenues, but this has slumped as prices have fallen and labor disputes, factional rivalries and militant attacks have slashed production. Meanwhile, Libyan banks have been suffering from severe liquidity problems, which bankers say is partly caused by people withdrawing cash and keeping it at home because of security concerns.
There are numerous reasons behind the failing economy. First and foremost, the lack of oil exports from the ports and oil fields. This is the main reason behind the crippled Libyan economy and has resulted in losses of some $70 billion in the last 2 years. Meanwhile, severe shortages in capital flows at the central bank have resulted in a halt in credit lines. So businessmen and merchants have now resorted to buying currency on the black market, so their business don't come to a halt, and they can continue to import basic goods, but through the black markets, which has now led to an increase in prices.
Tripoli residents say they are feeling the pressure from the price hike of goods.
The prices in the market are very high. Everything is more expensive. In the past, one will need 200 to 300 Libyan dinars. That's about $145 to $218 a month to survive. But now, one needs about 1,000, and that's without doing anything.
Rival factions have agreed in principle to have one oil organization for the strife-torn country. The foreign minister in the new UN-backed National Unity Government said this last week. Libyan oil sources say the OPEC member state will resume oil shipment from the port of Masa al-Hariga after a deal reached at talks in Vienna between rival oil officials representing the east and west of the country. Exports from the port have been blocked recently because of a standoff between the rival national oil corporations in the east and west.
We'll be back after this break.